day, everyone, and welcome to Ake Arts and Book Festival 2021 online. My name is Olaokun Soyinka, and I'm your host for the panel on the consequences of conspiracy theories for healthcare in Africa. In terms of definitions, we will take a fairly all-embracing view of the term conspiracy theory to include myths, hoaxes, and misinformation, as they all overlap and are similar in terms of their health consequences. As a public health doctor, I deem it my duty to ensure that bad advice does not go unchallenged. I'm aiming for the innocent consumer, the people trying to make sense of the mass of confusing and conflicting information out there. And I doubt that I make much impact on the main purveyors of this online nonsense. I am motivated to do this because health misinformation can harm and even kill. In a pandemic, this happens on a large scale. But what is this phenomenon? From Bill Gates wants to depopulate Africa, or COVID is spreading by 5G technology, or the vaccine is what is killing us, to all manner of fake cures and methods of prevention. Who are the people who come up with these stories? Do they really believe such unlikely myths? And if they do, why? Why do we see even scientists and doctors joining in? Why do people believe what is patently nonsensical to others? And how do we persuade those who sow the seeds of distrust to stop? Given the reach of the internet, will we ever see the end of this problem? In an attempt to answer some of these questions and to give us their insights, particularly into the unique problems we face on the African continent, I have three eminently qualified panelists here today. We have Dr. Dunsi Strohschein. She's a professor of public health in Canada. We have Prof Musa Moshabela, who is also a professor of public health. He's based in South Africa. And we have Prof Kama Rogo, who is an eminent professor in public health and reproductive health and international health, and he hails from East Africa. So we have a good geographical spread, and let's dive straight in. I'd like to start with a general comment from each of the panelists, and maybe we could kick off with you, Dr. Ducey. Give us a few comments on your general view of this interesting phenomenon.
Thank you so much, Dr. Soyinka. It's great to be here. Thanks for the honor. I see this as a foretaste of what's to come. We need to start to own our own stories and not always rely on the West for everything. Today, we're talking about conspiracy theories. I believe that they're a major part of our culture now. They have become mainstream. That is why we're all sitting here today trying to unpack that term. I used to associate the term conspiracy theory with intelligence agencies like the CIA and FBI. However, I observed in the 80s, during the era of HIV/AIDS, when there was a lot of conspiracy theory that the virus was created to decimate the Black population. And then in the 90s, in South Africa, if I'm correct, there was a time that it was believed that Black men were having sex with babies to cure themselves of HIV/AIDS. And then later on, the term took off during 9/11. It had traction around that period where so many conspiracy theories came out to try to decipher what happened 9/11. And then we saw that when Obama became president as well, that Obama was not American, he was a Muslim, and he was going to impose Sharia law in the US. And then more recently, Trump, who is the headmaster, I call him, of conspiracy theories, and then COVID and the vaccine. In my own opinion, conspiracy theories are anti-establishments, and they use fear and emotions to drive home their messages. They've taken over the world now, thanks to the internet and social media. One of the things I've observed is they do thrive in societies that are divided or highly, highly polarized. I can't really speak for all of Africa, but will speak for Nigeria. Nigeria, for example, is a highly polarized nation. along many lines and divides, religion, socioeconomic status, politics. And to add to that, Nigeria has one of the worst healthcare systems in the world, with majority of people paying out of pocket, and not so many people have health insurance. So in a situation like that, the poor and the disadvantaged, they turn to alternatives. And we know that in the case of Nigeria, the alternatives are mostly people who use the snake oil marketing strategy, which is a principle that the conspiracy theories also use. So Nigeria provides a fertile ground for conspiracy theories, in my own opinion. I would pause here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doc, and some interesting insights there. Let's move on next to Prof Musa. Could you give us a few comments?
Thank you so much, Dr. Soyinka, and greetings to the panelists. And it's also an honor for me to be at this festival. Much appreciate the invitation. And I think the question that we are addressing today is of essence. And really, it goes to the heart of how our society has evolved and the state that we are in today. And I find that this issue of conspiracy theories, misinformation, myths, and so forth, really, they have challenged us. And I find with COVID-19, they have challenged us in ways much, much larger and bigger and beyond what we have seen before, even with HIV/AIDS. And other conditions previously. And a large part of that has to do with how, in as much as we have advanced in a good way technologically, platforms like social media and how fast news spread and information spread, information to spread as well. And those who are running these campaigns, they have great platforms to actually do this practices, implement these practices through. And so in general, in public health, our attitude is always, let's provide the correct information. Even the way we provide information, we tend to provide information in ways that are quite factual without really taking the time to explain in detail why that information is believable. And yet, when you look at the campaigns that are organized around misinformation and disinformation, you find that people are very organized. They take the time to put together videos that provide strong arguments, whether it's correct or incorrect, but it becomes quite believable to the audience. And I think that I've been challenged in the past year and a half of COVID-19 to really think again about public health communication and how we need, or we ought to be, communicating information and engaging the audience. For a long time, we just communicate amongst ourselves and as in health and in science and so forth. But we are now being called upon to really engage actively with the public, communicate information in ways that are simple. And whenever you've got a public health emergency like COVID-19, we can see that it creates a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear, a lot of stress. And people are hungry for information. Everybody is hungry for information. They will, of course, consume the information that is available to them, and without necessarily having, I suppose, the know-how in terms of screening through the sources of information and knowing what is correct and what is not. And so we have found ourselves in a situation where the landscape around how information spreads and how information is consumed has really evolved. And so I would say that it is really timely that we talk about this, not just how we provide information, but also how we manage information in terms of credibility, in terms of the people who have to consume the information, the audience in particular. How do we actually make sure that information is accessible and it's empowering rather than disempowering? So there's a lot here that I think can be talked about and discussed, and it's a pleasure to join this panel.
Thank you very much. And yes, that's very true. The pandemic has certainly shown us that this is a fast evolving area, and it really needs urgent exploration. So, Prof Kama, over to you for your comments, please.
The topic that we are talking about today is particularly topical in health, but I want to step back and state that differences in opinion have always been there with us. since time immemorial. And when there are differences in opinion, people use various means to try and push their side of the argument. And that is fair because debate must be encouraged. The question is, when do those differences in opinion? But then let us look at what history tells us. In the days of Plato, the people believed that the world was flat. Some it was round. So who was conspiratorial looking at it from hindsight? The benefit of hindsight must be acknowledged here. Secondly, there was a time in Nigeria, in parts of Nigeria, when people believed that twins were a bad omen and they were killed. That gave rise to the Mary Slessor family in Calabar in Nigeria. I don't have to expand on that because this is what we have all gone through. The difference in opinion are not bad, neither is their dissemination. The only thing is, how do you group the differences in opinion and start judging what is conspiratorial and therefore the negative or positive effects of it? There's three groups that I want to put on the table. One is those jokers who send a message out there knowing that they are just joking, they're not serious. But they sit back and enjoy people arguing over it, some of them pretty seriously, and they start insulting each other in doing so. And the social media has made this a very, very popular pastime. Then there are those serious ones who are on a mission with their theory. And that mission bears particular damage if it is linked to two areas, politics or religion. When those two become the carrier of strongly held beliefs, then you start recruiting people who very, very innocently start adopting a desired behavior. And this is where we are recently in health. That the moment health messages are taken up by a religious group or by a political entity, then it starts becoming extremely toxic, both in terms of its effect and the speed at which it spreads. And we have seen that in the reproductive health area, particularly in areas, for example, of family planning, where certain religious groups have quite successfully spread the word that the taking of certain contraceptives will make you infertile or impotent. And we are still fighting that theory in a lot of African environments. We've also seen it much more recently in the area of COVID, where there has been a prevalent Pan-Africanism and African superiority that try to convey the message that Africans are immune to COVID. And this, because COVID did start outside of Africa, has made us lose nearly 1 or 2 years of time that we could have usefully spent on mitigating or preventing COVID. So let us ask ourselves the question, are all theories conspiratorial? And when do they become most toxic or lethal? What vehicles are there to use to advance that? I'll stop there for the time being.
Thank you very much to the panelists for setting the scene so nicely. Some interesting insights emerging there. What specific tactics have been effective in that particular situation? And maybe I'll start back with you, Dr. Dunsi.
I tend to be very wise. I don't engage people, especially when I know that you have your position. So I don't really engage people who are believers in false information. But what I try to do as much as possible is to try to share materials and try to encourage people to look at alternative materials. Because one thing I've noticed is that poor quality information gets passed down quite quickly. And thanks to social media, it's turned out to be the perfect platform for peddling false health information. For example, currently here, we've had all sorts, like you should drink bleach to cure COVID. And then currently in North America, there's this medication for deworming livestock that is now being purported to cure COVID. I do not like social media. I believe that social media has destroyed the core fabric of human society. When you have a platform that is designed to be addictive, really, but not designed for truth-telling, that is the petri dish for chaos in any society. I call social media the marketplace of chaos because there's no structure, there's no accountability. Anyone can post anything. And like Professor Kama said, and Professor Moshabela as well, that when you have people who can become influencers, who do you trust? Who do you follow? Do you follow science or do you follow the conspiracy theories? And so a further question for consideration, in my own opinion, is what is public health doing? I believe that public health, one way or the other, all over the world, not just in North America or Africa, they failed in terms of advocacy and outreach, communicating. And I remember Dr. Moshabela talking to that there was a lack of consistent public health communication. And I'll give a small example. WHO deterred on calling COVID a global pandemic. I still remember clearly in my little corner by the beginning of February saying, just after reading all of the reports, that this is a global pandemic. WHO didn't come out to say that COVID was a global pandemic until March 11th of 2020. That was a little too late, in my own opinion. And that created a vacuum for some of the conspiracy theories to churn out all sorts of misinformation. We had the same problem with CDC, that's the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Initially, they had a document showing that COVID was transmitted via aerosol transmission. And then they took that down and then later reposted it. So conspiracy theories latch on to things like this when they see establishments, public health organizations that are supposed to be the source of trusted information behaving like this. And I will stop here. I have so much more to say about organizations like WHO and CDC because I worked for one. And so there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes as well.
So, Prof Musa, do you take on the conspiracy theorists or do you tend not to get involved?
I do. I do engage them. So I think you asked about the platforms. So I think I find that I have different experiences in different platforms. So one, for example, in a WhatsApp family group, because I am considered, or colleagues actually in WhatsApp groups with colleagues, because I'm considered a trusted source, when they post information that is incorrect, all I have to do is to say to them, no, this is incorrect. The correct information is 1, 2, 3. And that's it. It ends there. They accept it. But then what I find is when I start to engage more in social media, for example, where people don't know me and don't have any reason to trust me, then that's where I get a lot of pushback. I also engage in the media doing radio interviews, and I also at times get quite a bit of pushback, even though, of course, that kind of mediated platform is different. It's more manageable, especially if you find that a journalist who's doing the interview is able to mediate, people who are engaging with incorrect information to protect the audience generally. But it's in social media, on Twitter, where it's a real struggle. And I find that most people who drive this information, they try to incorporate some parts of information that are true, but then distort it with incorrect information. And when that happens, because people will then confirm the part that is true, it creates an impression that the whole piece of information is true as well, even though the rest of it is incorrect. So you end up having to deal with the nuance of the information that they provide. The other thing I find is that they also look for information. They generate messages around information where there isn't enough evidence yet. So, for example, we only have experience with vaccines for less than 1 year, at most 9 months, in the general public globally. But then they would want to know, they would ask questions around long-term effects and generate messages around long-term effects beyond 12 months or 5 years from now, knowing very well that scientifically you don't have the hard evidence to dispute that. So, and of course, the other piece that I find that they use in terms of strategy is basically to exhaust you, to constantly ask you for evidence, and you provide evidence for this, they ask a piece of evidence for something else. And it's not that they read this, the intention is really to just exhaust you. And once you get exhausted, then it looks like they have won an argument, and other people who are listening and watching the engagements, then they tend to buy into that. And so this is where I've learned in terms of techniques to actually discredit false information, because previously what I will do is just provide the correct information, but the correct information in itself does not dispel the information that is incorrect. So you actually have to go out of your way to dispel the information that is incorrect. And oftentimes we find that we don't have the scientific evidence to dispel the information that is correct. We have evidence on the information that is correct. So it's those kind of strategies that I've seen. And fortunately, what happens on Twitter, for example, you start to have a community of people who are also activists and advocates who are willing to take them on, and they are willing to engage and provide the evidence necessary. And we also then begin to have a community of people who are fact checkers, who are actually equipped and trained to be able to verify information and dispute it. And they do a lot of intensive research, essentially discrediting information that is incorrect. And I have found that so useful to date. And I have a newly found respect for people who are fact checkers and the amount of work that they do in their research. So let me pause there, but that's what I would share for now.
Prof Kama, any similar experiences from your side?
I'll take it a step further to try and bring some, not controversy, but additional points here. I've asked myself as a medical person, does the Hippocratic oath that we take mandate us to provide the correct information whenever it is needed? Are disciples of scientific medicine, is it okay for them to remain silent when wrong information is being spread? First, given that most scientists are very poor communicators, we often want to remain silent. And we often want to avoid what we call controversy. And yet, the marketplace of public discourse is like the African marketplace, that all the goods and wares are brought there in the morning, and you try to sell everything by evening and before it gets dark. And the best salesperson will have their goods sold. So the question is, are those of us who are in these medical science areas good salespeople and engaging salespeople? Let's accept it that the biggest source of reliable information in public health should not be the individual, you or me. It should be the state, the government. How communicative and effective communicating are African governments? How trusted are they as a source compared to, say, the Catholic Church or Islam and so on? Because if we answer these questions, then you will see the futility of using certain messengers to spread a certain message, however correct it is. So comes the question that does the marketplace of public discourse allow you the luxury of providing the evidence that a scientific paper requires, that it was so and so in this study by so and so? No. You just have to state what it is and state it in the most believable manner. And since we are poor communicators, we are all losers when it comes to the social media, because we are trained to communicate science, and social media is not trained on scientific truth and facts. So this, I think, is a gap that even if we try to fill individually, it requires a much more concerted effort and recognition of what the phenomenon of social media is and how inadequate scientific communication is in using that media to get the facts out there.
Can I come back to you on that issue of the government? Because as Dr. Dunsi said, very often there's an anti-establishment element to this. And yes, our governments have proven very often not to be trustworthy, disseminators of information, or not to be trustworthy in holding the best interest of the citizens at heart. So I would ask you to elaborate. Do you not think we, as a profession, the medical profession, the public health profession, should strive to become better communicators, or put resources into hiring those who are excellent communicators to fill the vacuum that may be filled, that may have been left by government?
People frown upon you and me when we are communicating more in the social media than publishing. And since publication is the way to advance in our profession, there is a silent discouragement for us and our younger colleagues to be louder in the social media and spend time in scientific communication. That is a problem that we have to deal with. Secondly, when we look at our TV stations and radio stations in Nigeria, in South Africa, in Canada, the news anchors and reporters have a habit of getting opinions from certain people that they have created. And they may have created them because they're easier to access, or they are already on their payroll. So if it is CNN, they will have the opinion of XYZ. And oftentimes, those may not be the best people to communicate in that particular subject. And sometimes, as an expert in that subject, you may sit in your sitting room and really get worried about how misleading and how inadequate the explanations are given. Second, we in Africa, because we do so much of our own research, have a habit of waiting for WHO, CDC, and the European regulators to do something. And then we accept it because it has been done there. But then when you go to my rural Africa where I am and you start telling people WHO said this, who is WHO? Who's CDC? So how do we domesticate that evidence from CDC or the European regulators or WHO in a manner that makes it look like we own it? But oftentimes we use that reference because we don't want to take any responsibility for it. We have been too lazy to collect our own data. But we want to say that we are not doing it out of ignorance because somebody else has done it. So what you are asking me brings me to asking the bigger question, that the answers that we give, who owns it? To what extent can we domesticate it? And who is the messenger? In the social media, the messenger doesn't have to be somebody who's qualified in anything, but he must be somebody who is willing to spend time and be online with everybody else, and even sometimes jocularly. When it comes to the effect and impact of your intervention, I would say that it varies depending on whether the person you are responding to or that message is by an individual who's truly ignorant, they tend to want to learn, or it's a joker, they will make another joke of your response, or it is somebody who's on a mission, political or religious. These two, it doesn't matter what you say, they are on a mission. And getting it out of that mission is not about what you say or even how you say it. They will stick to theirs. And they have the time to continue repeating that message. Which brings me to the final point, that it is the repetition of these messages, of this theory, that make them so toxic and so dangerous. They are repeated. And the more you join them and therefore expose the people you communicate with to that same reference, the better it is for them, because they are now getting their message to even more people than they intended to do. So it's really a lose-lose situation, so to speak. We have to do things differently.
So many points there. I almost don't want to select a specific one. Dr. Dunsi, would you like to comment on any of those issues about the messenger, about ownership, and so on?
Yes, I quite agree with Dr. Kama, 100%, and thanks for sharing your wisdom. One aspect I'd like to add to what you just said, Dr. Kama, for us not to forget is the element of human beings. We're not rational beings. Take, for example, smoking. The science is clear on smoking, that smoking kills, and yet so many people still smoke. That's why we have cults following. Many people follow fake pastors and cults. And so we always have to have that aspect of the human mind, how it works. There are times, no matter whatever evidence we present, no matter how well we present our information or how coordinated we are in terms of communicating the right information, human beings the human mind enjoys entertainment, and the so-called conspiracy theories, they're very good at presenting entertaining information. Science, not so much, and for a good reason. Like in science, we're very careful. We follow due diligence. We follow protocol. We acknowledge uncertainties and limitations. But with the conspiracy theories, they make statements, bold statements. They express themselves at times forcefully. So how to beat that, I believe, is a question for further consideration, because I don't know. I envision a better world for Africa where we will begin to come together like this. I was so excited just seeing everyone from different African countries today being together and to begin to have this kind of discussions and pave the way forward for our people as well. For example, Madagascar, I was reading, came up with some traditional remedies. I am not against traditional remedies, but then we need scientific evidence to back up the traditional remedies they're proposing. We need clinical trials. But I read that the senior director of communications for the president said they don't need any clinical trials. This works, and so we're just going to continue to use it. And so we need more like research centers in Africa, centers of excellence, innovation that is being spearheaded by Africans. And I think I would like to say thank you to Dr. Soyinka at this point. I read that you spearheaded the health insurance scheme for Ogun State. So we need more of that in Africa. And I'm hopeful, just even hearing from Dr. Kama today and Dr. Moshabela, I hope I'm calling your name correctly. I'm really hopeful and I'm happy that we're having this discussion.
Thank you. Dr. Musa, any comments on those? So many issues there, but I think the issue of doctors as communicators
Yeah.
What's your, and any response to the provocative comments Dr. Kama raised?
It's a really important question, really, and it's one that we must not take for granted at all. I think that the issue of engaging the public in general is something that we tend to leave as the last part whenever we think of public health interventions. From the beginning, for example, of COVID-19, I often felt like, yes, we are preparing hospitals, we are preparing healthcare workers, we are preparing the borders and all of that, but we were not really engaging and preparing the public. And so even when you listen to the communication, we don't come to that. And even when it came to vaccines, we don't really, intentionally engage the public. And part of the problem I see is that our healthcare system is based largely on a curative model where we are used to people coming to us rather than us going to the people. And we tend to wait for people to get sick in order to engage them. We don't often engage people from the perspective of well-being, engaging with people who are well. We don't even know how to engage with people who look well, feel well. In general, it's not a model of healthcare that we are familiar with. And yes, we've done studies on public perceptions in terms of who to trust. And it's true, the public doesn't really trust the government. They don't really trust scientists. They don't trust the media. They don't trust this sort of formal establishment. The current climate that we are in, it's a climate of mistrust. But what we are finding is that there is a lot of confidence and trust in doctors and nurses and healthcare workers who are in the front line. And unfortunately, there is also a common mistake that we make to think that a healthcare worker in the front line is the same as a healthcare expert or scientist. And oftentimes there can be a big gap between those two, because the healthcare workers on the front line also need information to be given to them. And when you're dealing with a public health emergency where there is a rapid explosion of new information, that information doesn't even get to the healthcare workers on time. And so we're finding ourselves in a situation where the people that we trust to provide the public with information, or the people that the public trust to receive information from, they themselves actually rely on public reports. They don't necessarily have effective mechanism of ensuring that information is synthesized for them in terms of evidence and guidelines and kind of factual information given to them on the front line so that they can engage the public with. So I put that in the context of the fact that we do expect the state on our continent to engage. We act as a trusted source, but the political climate and issues of corruption and so forth have led to a situation where the public doesn't trust them. So we've got a diversity of sources of information, and different sectors of society rely or trust certain sources of information. And as we've indicated, Dr. Kama has indicated that you do have people who would have strong beliefs religiously. They trust their religious leaders to provide them with information. You have people who have strong political beliefs. They trust their political principles to provide them with information, irrespective of what health experts are going to say, or even their own healthcare workers. The other sector really is the business sector that is really influencing the market. Because a lot of the issues that have to do with COVID really have had economic influence, and everybody is just making sure that they secure the bag and make sure that their income is protected. They are also sources of information. They have people who trust them. So we have a plurality of sources of information trusted by different diverse groups in our community, in our society, and all of these sources don't sing from the same hymn page. And so I do think that recognizing that and allowing for a more complex approach to communication may be a better approach than trying to find one source that can be a communicator for everybody.
What do we do about these scientists and doctors who also join the bandwagon of the conspiracy theorists and join in spreading misinformation. Dr. Dunsi, do you have an answer, and do you have experience of this?
That is a $1 million question. My husband and I, we have discussions about this. We've been trying to figure that out. It baffles me. We've not been able to. And so I hope I've not disappointed you. I can't even answer that question.
Well, no,
I can't wrap my head around this. My husband has a PhD in electrical engineering, and we both talk about this, that even people with high IQs fall into the hands of these conspiracy theorists. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. But what I do know is that the last 2 years, I've observed that countries who did well, or countries who are doing well right now, are countries with fine leaders. So we do need fine and trusted, honorable men and women to begin to lead in order for there to be trust in society. I think most societies now, we're struggling with lack of trust. COVID, Trump, we've seen that clearly from what happened the last few years. So that's the best way I can answer that question.
Yeah, well, no, I'm glad that somebody else is as mystified as I am. Prof Musa, are you mystified? Are you with us, or can you demystify it for us?
I cannot demystify it at all, but I think that I have accepted it. I have accepted that, we are not one body as health professionals or even scientists. We are not one body, we are diverse. And there are other factors that influence us besides our professional belonging. There are people amongst us who have strong religious beliefs that may even supersede their professional practice. We've seen it even in the past in terms of issues around termination of pregnancy and so forth. We've seen this before. And again, also when it comes to political groups, you might find that there are people who feel very strongly. Some people have had their own traumas and, losing loved ones, and they look for certain ways of coping, and they find solace in the comfort that science is wrong. Even though they provide healthcare for all sorts of conditions, and they make an exception about that particular issue. And so I have accepted it that we will find colleagues who they themselves do not agree, do not believe, do not accept, and may even go as far as influencing their patients or the patients that they see to actually adopt their own views. It's the same thing that I've experienced when it comes to this notion of conspiracy theories and myths. I've moved from a perception that I held earlier, where really I clearly categorized these issues as myths. And when we now roll out the vaccines, more and more I'm realizing that actually people take their lived experiences and turn them into fact, as if that is scientifically proven, because their lived experience can carry so much weight for them, irrespective of what science say. And because it's not easy to dispute someone's lived experience, then that lived experience can actually even supersede the scientific fact. And we see that even amongst healthcare workers. So, and we see it in the public. And so I have started to frame these issues of myths as public concerns. I'm grappling with the phenomenon to actually say that, yes, it exists, it's a problem. Instead of getting upset at it, let's perhaps think about what it represents in our society. And as we are saying, one thing it could represent is lack of trust. Another thing it could represent is pain and trauma from past experiences. It could represent other phenomena that we still need to understand. And those phenomena that it represents may manifest even amongst our colleagues. And so we're going to have to be a lot more empathetic to look beyond the presentation of the myth or of the conspiracy theory to actually understand what is it that represents for them, and extend a hand to help deal with whatever source that may be actually germinating the pain or trauma or hurt that makes them engage in the way that they engage or push whatever agenda that they push. And that empathy is something that I've found that it's very difficult when people actually say things that you don't agree with, and you feel like they're actually putting other people at risk because of the information that they spread. But we're going to have to find it, because we are in a broken society. It's not going to be easy to solve the broader societal issues, but within our spaces, if we actually can look beyond and look deeper, we might actually begin to tap into some of the things that we can at least start talking about for now. I would say that's my experience so far. And in some instances, it has actually worked. It has revealed where people are coming from, and it shifted the discussion from the conspiracy theory to whatever pain or hurt that a person has, either being losing a loved one or because of something else that might have happened.
That's wise advice, and I'll try and remember that when I feel the frustration rising when I hear a scientist, doctor, spreading misinformation. Prof Kama, any similar experiences, any advice on what to do when our colleagues, people who should know better, spread misinformation and conspiracy theories?
I've dealt with a lot of these, Dr. Soyinka, in my career. And I tend to be empathetic, but also inquisitive. And in inquiring, I have found three different groups here. There are people who genuinely believe in what they are saying. And for whatever reason, they keep saying it, and they will not accept any alternatives. That brings me to the second group that is tied to that. That as science grows and as mental health parameters are expanded, we are seeing subtle mental conditions that we previously considered to be normal or on the verge of normal. And when you cannot see what others see or accept what others have accepted, the question is, who is wrong, you or the others? Here, the theory of the majority doesn't seem to work very well. Let's admit it. There are certain professions and areas of interaction where marginal mental instability is actually an advantage. You can see it in the churches and preaching, when you see the guys who are on the streets with their Bible frothing from the mouth, and the guy who is in the pulpit sweating himself out. What is normal under those circumstances? This is the same reason, Dr. Soyinka, why in politics you will not win the governorship of Ogun State. But somebody who is less qualified than you, who is ready to lie, knowing that is lying, will win, because he'll tell people what he wants to believe. So we are stretching the margins of normality. This becomes dangerous in a profession where a lot of the regulation is self-regulation. So the limits of our regulatory authorities to silence somebody who knowingly, but because of religious or political positions, is saying something that they actually don't believe it, are limited. And even during this time of COVID, I have been surprised at how lenient the medical associations and regulators in what we consider more advanced countries have been in tolerating what most people who believe that there is what is normal and was acceptable would not want to see happening. And the fact then is that are some of them paid to take those positions? Yes. There are some of them who live very lucratively because they are taking those positions. So they're not really speaking for themselves, but it's an agenda that is bigger than themselves. And it is within these mixed pots that we must start asking ourselves, where do you start? Is starting going to the media and responding? Is it something that should be in the professional ethics and regulation? Is it something that should be ingrained in you in the medical school? What if the medical school that you go to is built by a religious organization that doesn't believe in contraceptives? When you come out of there and you get your certificate, what are you supposed to do? Advance that theory or be moderated by the regulators to say that this is what you can do? We are talking about a vacuum here. And that vacuum is linked to the vacuum in knowledge, that even science does not have answers for everything. And let's admit it, the less answers or the less certain the scientific answers are, the more theories that are out there. But let's also accept that scientific inquiry starts with a theory. But people who follow science want to use scientific method for verifying. People who don't want to use other methods or don't care whether it is verified or not. We are in a quagmire here. There is big space out here. I do not think that there is any single answer to it. But if we do not find ways of containing it, it can be absolutely toxic, as we have already alluded to.
Thank you, sir. Before we leave, I would love if we could try to give our viewers a little something to hold on to as they depart, in addition, of course, to all the food for thought. So we mentioned this briefly before. I'd like to go around, starting with you, Dr. Dunsi, and get from you a couple of sources of trusted information that our viewers, if they feel like turning to somewhere to help fact check or dispel hoaxes, or even just access trusted information, what have you found useful? What would you like to recommend? I'll start with you, Dr. Dunsi, then Dr. Musa, and finish off with Prof.
I'm not sure conspiracy theories would agree with me on my sources, the sources I turn to. And the sources I turn to, I must confess, they're not perfect as well. So WHO, for example, I would rehash what I said right from the beginning, that I see this platform as a foretaste of what's to come for Africa. I'm really excited. And I hope that someday we can begin to look at setting up centers of excellence and innovation in Africa. And also, we need more public health storytellers. And what I mean by that, because I keep going back to what Dr. Musa said about communication gap, that was a major problem here as well. Public health failed in that regard, and healthcare. So I'm hoping that there will be more public health storytellers, especially in places like Africa, where there's this colonial history that drives some of the lack of trust that we see in society against establishments. And so public health storytellers can be pivotal in bringing communities together. And they can be seen as that trusted source of information as well, especially when it's someone that is from that same community, assuring them and trying to acknowledge some of the harm done to some of this population. On that note, I would like to say thank you so much for this opportunity, and it was a great pleasure to meet everyone.
I think that for me, the most exciting platform I have found has been the platforms for people who are fact checkers. In Africa, we've got africacheck.org. It's been a revelation for me, and I, by all means, encourage people who have concerns, questions that they think are conspiracy theories or myths. is to go to their websites and read their articles, or to write to them and request for them to investigate certain things and provide advice. I follow them on Twitter, and I'm always excited to see how thorough they are in their investigation. So that aspect of fact checkers has been really interesting, and I follow some of them also on Twitter, and just the way they think, the way they investigate is different to the way we do things, and I'm learning a lot from them. The other that I want to emphasize is because information comes out quickly, and usually the standard platforms of information, like the government, you've got WHO, you've got CDC, the standard ones. Usually information doesn't come out quickly. They wait to synthesize information before it comes out, and you find that there is news articles that come out even before they say anything. Sometimes articles that are not even peer reviewed, they will be in the media and so forth. What I encourage is to focus on people who are health journalists. And even though they are often, not given the platform a lot, if health journalists, they are better at processing information for the public. And I find that when they are experienced, they're quite good at capturing information correctly, factually, and yet in a way that is easy to understand. Lastly, I just want to encourage everyone, each and every one of us, to ask ourselves, who do we consider a trusted source of information when it comes to health and public health, be it COVID-19 or others? And perhaps a process of really going on a journey to ask us why we consider them a trusted source, and be intentional in choosing a trusted source might actually be more useful than me telling someone what a trusted source is. And I'm saying this in light of the point I made, that there's so much plurality and diversity in our sources that we trust. But if we can actually appraise the sources we currently use and really ask ourselves the extent to which we trust them, why we trust them, and whether it's reasonable, and what is it we trust about them, that might be a good way to move forward. Thank you.
Dr. Soyinka, you are what you believe. And we are fundamentally talking about the struggle with the word trust. Who do you trust with what information? It is during our lifetime that the word fake news has become as an accepted way of government communicating with the subjects. And while for America this was new, for us in Africa, fake news coming from what should be the most trusted source, government, is not a new phenomenon. When I travel, Dr. Soyinka, from Lagos to Abeokuta, I travel through some of the acreage that have made evangelical wonders globally. There is nothing that has sold from Africa, apart from their gold and our diamond, than the evangelical prowess that resides between Lagos and Abeokuta in Ogun State. And if I were to answer your question, sir, I would want you to invite me again to talk to the leaders of those mega churches. How have they managed to get people to trust and live upon their word globally in a manner that I cannot do it in my village with all my education and all my certificates? This is an issue of communication. But then we have seen in the last 5 years, everything that we believed in being turned upside down. We believed that government should tell you the truth, especially in matters of health. And we've seen the most powerful government in the world surviving and probably almost winning an election based on theories. So this has given, I believe, opened doors for theorists and for non-truth tellers, because we no longer know what the truth is. I think that Africa is in a particularly bad state because from the beginning, we have not trusted our government, our institutions, our systems, and even our scientists. So when you ask me this question, I must pause and ask myself if in the few years that I have remaining in this world, I can be part of the solution for this intractable problem.
I would like to say a very big thank you for our wonderful guest. I've been interested in this topic for a long time. I've read a lot about it, and yet I've learned so much more and gained so many insights. And I would love to keep talking with you all on this subject as we go forward. For our viewers, thank you for being with us. I hope you've got some answers to some questions you may have had. We've learned that conspiracy theories have always been with us. It's part of the human condition. We are irrational beings, and it stems from a variety of motives that include particular mistrust and other things that give rise to a general anti-establishment, anti-authority, or authoritarian kind of sentiment. The way forward, we are going to have to gain ownership of these stories. And when I say stories, prompted by Dr. Ducey's comment about we do respond well to storytellers, so maybe we need to start telling better stories in the public health sphere and developing better institutions, trusted institutions, and institutions who will help us gain ownership of the public health stories out there. Thank you for being with us. We hope you've enjoyed this, and we look forward to meeting you all again.
Let me introduce a new wave, we change the rules. A new app that you can use. Wanna change your life, then choose. Save money and invest. Pay bills when you decide. Safe and secure for you when you need a loan, request it. One bank for you, one bank for me. So chill and enjoy the ride. Stop the current account on it. One bank.
One Bank by Sterling. Open a current account and start transacting.